What's going on, everybody? This is another episode of Clay's Corner. I'm Russell Clay. You can find all my stuff over at fantasyguru.com. Today, we are going to be looking at survivorship bias in football and why it matters. And there's a lot of different reasons why I think this matters, but we're going to be focusing on wide receivers today. And I think, giving this little visual, this sort of 5 to 10 minute summary will kind of help you understand why, so many players, number one, get forgotten over time and why it's so easy to incorrectly evaluate positions. So let's start with looking at what survivorship bias is, and then we'll get into the weeds a little on players and draft classes and all that good stuff. So, all right, survivorship bias is the logical error of concentrating on the people or things that made it past some selection process. And for this example, we're going to be talking about fantasy football, how players finish, how many yards players get, things like that. Made it past some selection process and overlooking those that did not. So we're forgetting about all those players that aren't getting snaps, that got cut, that got injured, that didn't make it past a certain point in their career, that didn't produce like we want in fantasy football. Typically because of their lack of visibility. Again, out of sight, out of mind. If we're not drafting these players, if we're not thinking about them from a fantasy perspective, then they don't matter. This can lead to incorrect conclusions. And I see this a lot, not only at the NFL level, but also at the college level with evaluating prospects and sort of, if one guy failed, then the other guy failed, or if one guy succeeded, then that's the archetype we're looking for in the future. So we get a lot of mixed data in football. We're working with smaller sample sizes, even over a long period. So let's dive in to what I'm talking about here. So number one, I went through the draft finder on Pro Football Reference, and I went and looked through to see how many wide receivers had been drafted since the 2000 draft class. So that's 23 draft classes, right, from 2000 to 2022. That is, it's 745. There have been 745 wide receivers drafted since the 2000 class. I'm kind of quickly floating through them here so you guys can see what I'm looking at. When you kind of account for that, you think there's no way that's true. And I actually put out a tweet earlier today asking people to guess how many wide receivers have been drafted over the last, 2 decades since this. Most people were saying 400, 300, 500, somewhere around there. And very few were actually saying, in that 700 range. It's so hard to remember how many guys barely played. Maybe they played 1 year, they got cut, or, all those 5th, 6th, 7th rounders that barely made rosters. And so then we know that, and we can subtract out the 2022 class, right? We're going to take that out and say, all right, how many wide receivers have been successful for us in our fantasy lineups over the last 2 decades? And so I came over here. So we know there's 745, and then you take out this class, take out 2022. So there is 717 players who have played at least a season over the last, whatever period. We have, over the last 20 years, we have 70 players who have produced 5,000 or more receiving yards. And that's guys like Sammy Watkins, guys like Torrey Smith, Brandon LaFell fits in that, Nate Burleson, Jabbar Gaffney, Ted Ginn. I mean, these guys are not superstars, and there's only 70 of these guys. So if we come over here and we say, all right, 70 divided by 717, that is less than 10% of the wide receiver drafted, right? And those are the players that, were even somewhat consistently valuable in fantasy football over the last two decades. So the main point here is that we are forgetting so many players. And so I see this a lot when we look at the first couple years of a player, and we'll get into this now. When a player doesn't produce in their first couple years, or they don't produce a fantasy relevant season, I think of like a Devontae Smith last year. He finished with, what did Devontae Smith? Devontae Smith finished with 916 receiving yards, or yards from scrimmage last year. But because of Jamar Chase and because of Justin Jefferson the year before, it kind of feels like he didn't have that great of a rookie year. And I'm here to tell you that's not true. That's just survivorship bias. So we remember Jamar Chase. We remember Justin Jefferson. But only 29% of first-round wide receivers produce, 29 or 30%, produce 800 or more total yards as a rookie. So 29%, that's 1 in 3 basically. But, when we look at Devontae Smith, we say, yeah, that's pretty mediocre. When in fact, it's actually way above average. It's actually really, really, really good. And so that's kind of the main point I'm going to talk about today, and kind of already have. We're floating through here. So, how can we apply this to our fantasy football life? This is how I do it. So again, I collected all this data, right? We're looking at wide receivers producing in year one. We know over the last 2 decades, 29.5% of wide receivers drafted in round one produce 800 or more receiving yards or total yards. We know 14% of second round wide receivers produce a big rookie year. Same thing with third rounders. We know 5% do well in year one. So why do we have expectations for these guys in year one? Basically, we are taking the outliers, taking the special guys and saying, this is what should be the standard, when in fact it is not the standard at all. When we're looking at a wide receiver drafted in round 3, we should basically be locking in a redshirt season. Even a second round pick, Christian Watson, Wan'Dale Robinson, John Mechie, Tyquan Thornton, George Pickens, Alec Pierce, Sky Moore. So that's what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's 7 wide receivers. That's we're looking at maybe one of those guys being really fantasy relevant in year one. That's kind of what we're looking at here. And that is not necessarily the expectation right now. I will go back to a draft class for us to sort of look at. My favorite one is the 2013 class. That's the one with Mike Evans. No, 2014. Let's take a look at this. So when we look at this class, right, we remember Mike Evans, Devontae Adams, Brandon Cooks, Jarvis Landry, Odell Beckham, Allen Robinson, Sammy Watkins. And then we kind of get down to the Kelvin Benjamins, Dante Moncriefs, Paul Richardson, Martavis Bryants of the world. And we view them as busts. We view a Paul Richardson and a Martavis Bryant as busts. And I would generally agree with that. And for injury reasons, I would say Paul Richardson is a bust. But he did have a pretty good, run here. He did play 7 years. He did get a second contract. Same thing with Martavis Bryant. He had trouble with suspensions, but he did have that season with above 800 receiving yards. He had another with above 600, and his rookie year above 500. And so for fantasy purposes, that's a horrific, terrible, this isn't valuable. But It is valuable, is what I'm here to tell you today. When we kind of look at Martavis Bryant, and we're going to be looking at wide receiver expectations here. Here's what it looks like for a career for a wide receiver. So in the fourth round, 85.4% of wide receivers drafted in round 4 never get a season with over 800 yards. Never. 85%. So that means this one season means Martavis Bryant is, an outlier. He's a part of this group. 14.6%, just 14.6% of fourth round wide receivers ever get one season. So when a guy like that breaks out, that's really special, but it doesn't look special because he's getting compared to all these, Julio Jones and all those types of guys. So we're not remembering all those other fourth round picks, those, 15 to 20 fourth round picks that straight up busted. And we're not comparing, Martavis Bryant to the correct group of folks. So that is my quick summary. I hope you guys learned something today. Hopefully we'll be talking about this type of stuff more. But that is kind of my stream of consciousness for the day. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I'll talk to you later.